Well, thank you for the Donaldson Fellowship for hosting today's events and their openness, and thank you for Belmont University, Harding Brewing House, Caliber Coffee, and all these places that have opened the door for Ask and Wonder. I want to say thank you to my wife Rebecca, who helps me so much with designing the. Actually, we're us. Yeah, that's the us.
Yes.
There you go. So she helps me design the posters, the design, that logo. She made that logo. So yeah. So thank you very much, Rebecca, for doing all of that. And also thank you very much for our first donor, Dr. Daniel Canale, whose donation has helped us. Us, as I mean, bring more quality, and bring more quality content to the conversation in Nashville, and also, to reach more people. So you can go to askandwonder.com, that's the website, and you can become a patron if you like to, for Ask and Wonder, helping more dialogue in understanding empathy and challenge to the city of Nashville and beyond. Well, okay. So let me first introduce a little bit the speakers, and so the order of the event is going to be the following. There's an introduction of speakers, then each speaker is going to have 5 minutes presentation on today's topic. After that, I'll do my best to moderate a dialogue among these amazing thinkers that we have on stage. And after that, we'll have 5 minutes for you guys to hand in your questions. I'll go over the questions, and then we'll go to the questions part, okay? And I encourage you, before leaving, just leave your email, ask questions to the speakers, just finish the event and leave. Just let's build some community here, okay? Yeah. Okay, so let's start with this. Enjoy, be challenged, and be understanding, of course. So let's do it. I'll start introducing Sergio Perry. He's a follower of Christ, but also a husband of a very patient woman for 8 years now, and a father of 2 beautiful but spoiled kids. He loves spending time with his family and congregation, and has a fond attachment to anything wrestling, not WWE, a practitioner and lover of martial arts. Christ pulled him from the drug and alcohol addicted pit that his life was at the age of 23. There have been obstacles along the way, but God has kept him through it all. No higher education or well-known seminary school under his belt, just your ordinary guy who has spent multiple years doing independent theological and philosophical studies in his spare time. A Navy veteran who serves a supernatural great God. Please welcome Sergio Perry. Okay, so now I'll go with Eric Murphy. Eric Murphy is a prominent member of the atheist community of Austin, as well as a co-host for the YouTube series Talk Heaven. Is that the way you pronounce it?
Heathen.
Yesterday I was thinking that word, it's heathens. Thank you, Eric. And after questioning his faith and then finding outlets like the atheist experience to help him understand his thoughts on faith and religion, he moved from California to Austin in 2016 and immediately started volunteering for the ACA. Since first stepping foot into the Free Thought Library, he has helped to shape the ACA and the atheist movement through social media and activism, as well as doing as much as he can to help promote a positive atheist culture by building bridges between different communities to create understanding and open lines of communication. In his spare time, he enjoys talking with both theists and atheists, educating himself in philosophy and religion, and has never turned down gin from a fan. So please welcome Eric Murphy. Okay, I'll go now with Chris Wiley. Is pastor of Living Word Fellowship, which is in White House, Tennessee. He has been married to his wife for 14 years. He's the father of 4 wonderful kids. He became a Christian at the age of 9 and hasn't really strayed from that except for a brief 2 years in college. But even in that, he didn't go too far. He has been in the ministry for 20 years. He has been a youth pastor, worship pastor, young adult pastor, board member, associate pastor, and now the lead pastor. Wow. He is a believer who has experienced God on many levels and very personally. He believes the scripture for what it is. He sees it as the truth. He loves conversations about all the hard topics of scripture and faith. He has taught apologetics in the classroom of the school and teaches it now from his pulpit. So please welcome Chris Wiley. he's a person who is very concerned with human suffering. He studies philosophy at Austin Peay State University and is a featured speaker at the video debates website callout.com with a Q. He has many friends in the secular community action group Clarksville Atheists. He served as an infantryman in the United States occupation of Afghanistan. So please welcome Joel Diemoz. Well guys, enjoy. As I said, just be challenged, be understanding, and open your minds and open your hearts as well. So we'll start with Joel's presentation of 5 minutes, okay? I'll be a little bit annoying if you guys go over the 5 minutes, okay? So forgive me for that. Thank you guys.
I timed myself. I think I have.
Okay.
5 minutes. How you guys doing? Yeah. So I wanted to open this up with a little maybe word association game. So I'm going to throw out a word, and whoever feels compelled to just hit me back with the first thing that pops in your head. So, for example, if I said hippopotamus, you might say like the Nile River Delta or dangerous species or something. So the word I'm going to go with, the word I'm going to throw at you guys is philosophy.
Aristotle.
Aristotle. Awesome. I'm sorry? Did somebody else say something about Greece?
Greece.
Greece, right? Maybe men in togas, or they usually are men in togas, right? Talking about how many angels can dance upon the head of a pin. Well, I think that's sort of a fair characterization of philosophy. I think it's certainly the popular view of it, but I'm going to talk about it in maybe a little bit different framing. So I'm going to get right into the plain language of the contention at hand today. That is, does my worldview equip me to understand the world? No. As a person who cares about philosophy, what my worldview allows for me to do is to reconcile the fact that I do live in a world, and I do exist in a world that sometimes I can't understand, even on a fundamental level. I think that living in this state of sincere vulnerability, that you might be wrong about every belief that you hold, it isn't always easy. But to my theistic friends and to my non-believing friends alike, I would say that living in such a state is the necessary precondition for a tolerant society. The history of philosophy and the history of Western thought has been a series of people who have made claims about the true and necessary foundations for the way the world really is. Aquinas argued that his version of God revealed the natural order of the universe. Aquinas' arguments are still used against people that are homosexual today. Anytime you hear an argument that being gay is wrong because it's unnatural, that argument comes from Aquinas. His sort of natural order ideology was actually used as a pretext, brutal subjugation and colonization of the New World by folks like the Spanish. John Locke's argument for natural rights that flow from a loving creator God, and John Locke was a guy that was really concerned about tolerance, about how we can all live together in a society and have it not be violent, right? Despite that, his arguments were used to justify Robespierre and the Reign of Terror in France. Heads rolled out of it's really quite a good philosophy. Karl Marx didn't need a God figure to figure out that the true teleological makeup of human society was a binary struggle between exploited and exploiter. Again, his ideology was used as a pretext for the deaths of millions under Mao and Stalin. In the 1960s, a very smart Reformed theologian in the Calvinist tradition named Cornelius Van Til developed a theology that purports to have found the necessary foundations for intelligibility by the way of his version of the Christian God. Now, just a few weeks ago, in our own wonderful state of Tennessee, a police officer, a detective, and a Baptist minister named Greg Fritz called upon the government, to carry out the execution of anyone that he perceived to be gay. His standard of evidence was, if you are even pictured at a pride event, that's enough for the state to come arrest you and put you on trial and to have you executed. To be frank with all you guys, I'm not interested in convincing anyone that there is no God. I don't think I'm smart enough to do that. What I'm saying is, whatever your belief is, be open to the possibility that you are wrong. There are many interesting conversations that we can have about the nature of reality, but when your claim is so sure of itself that it doesn't even allow for other views to exist, if you must use language like professed atheist, or if you think that all God believers, all theists are foolish just because of their God belief, the foundation for intolerance is already set. And an intolerant world is simply not a world that I'm really interested in living in.
Major, how much time do I got left?
You have 30 seconds.
Okay. If someone tells me that they believe in God, to me it's no different than telling me that their grandmother has freckles. It's the reasoning that supports that God belief that I'm concerned about, and what that God belief says that we should do as a society, or how they seek to impose that God belief on other people. And I think whether you're a believer or you're a non-believer, that's where we have to be careful. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Sergio.
How's everybody doing today? All right, I'd like to start out in the word prayer. I'm just kidding. I don't want to give any unfair advantage. First, I'd like to thank Pedro for putting this event together. I'd like to thank Joel and Eric for coming here and discussing a very important topic in our word today. Do we need God to make sense of life? I can tell you from experience that there was a time in my life where God wasn't even a thought in my mind, because all I could think about was my next high, my next alcoholic beverage, my next adrenaline rush. I lived life of a hedonist. To stimulate my nerve endings was all I cared about, and there was no room for God in my life, even though I believed in Him. I just had to put Him in the far corners of my mind and satisfy my desires and peace. Jesus stepped in the middle of my mess. He brought purpose, meaning, and sense to the chaos that dominated every thought and action. So do we need God to make sense of life? I believe we need God to make sense of any and everything. Without a transcendent, universal, and immaterial God, how do we account for universal, immaterial, abstract laws of logic, absolute morals, and the human emotions? So as I was driving one morning in my delivery truck, I made it in time to see the sunrise, and I thought to myself how magnificent the view was, and how ridiculous it was anyone could say it just happened by chance. So I imagined how it would be if I was seeing this with one of my atheist friends. What would they say? So I played out this skit in my head. Man, look at that sunrise. Isn't God awesome? No, man, evolution is awesome. But you know evolution is just a process, right? Yeah, I mean, the Big Bang is awesome. Okay, so what created the Big Bang? Absolutely nothing. Well, you know that nothing comes from nothing, right? Yeah, and that's awesome. The consistent atheist philosopher Jeffrey Dahmer said this regarding atheism: if a person doesn't think there is a God to be accountable to, then what's the point of trying to modify your behavior to keep it within acceptable ranges? I was listening to the Talk Heathen show that Eric hosts on YouTube, and a man who stated he used to be a pastor got on there and he said he was talking to one of his atheist friends, and he let him know that basically he had become an atheist now. And so he asked his atheist friend, he said, "So what do I do now?" And his atheist friend said, "Do whatever you want to do." So basically what came to mind when I heard that is I thought about Aleister Crowley, because Aleister Crowley is a very well-known Satanist. And one of his mantras is, "Do as thou wilt." So basically, if you can throw God out of the picture, then technically there's no one to hold you accountable. So there's one way right there that you can try to make sense of life without God, but really in the end, there's no foundation for your belief. So I understand right now, guys, that we're doing this debate, and technically, we're trying to see who can have the better worldview, or should I say that we're clashing right now with worldviews. But in the end, guys, everybody right now, we're living this life, and I fully just want to let everybody know that at the end of the day, it's all about what happens to us when we die. I've been so close to death on many occasions from drug overdoses, seen my life flash before my eyes multiple times. And if it was not for Jesus Christ to pull me out of that, I just want to let you know that I would probably be dead right now. So give your life to Christ before it's too late. That is my, I guess you could say, witnessing purpose. And thank you all for coming.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Sergio. Eric, please.
All right. I don't know where to start after that. I guess first I kind of want to see a show of hands, get a feel for things. If you're a Christian or follower of Christ, can I get a show of hands just to kind of see what we're looking at? Okay, non-believers.
They're on the back, all the atheists.
Right. That's right. Thank you for coming. Okay. Yes. Okay. See, no, you're going to be my smiling faces. Okay. So where do I begin? I think you know what? I'm going to put a pin in the intangible, dependent piece. I know that is probably the line that's going to be gone down, and I think that's also one that's going to fly over a lot of people's heads. And I think the better conversation is the one people are going to walk out understanding. So where do I go? Would it be the massive amount of volunteer work that I see atheists, secular people, and just friends, family members, neighbors doing together with each other? Do I look at the tens of thousands of dollars that my organization has raised in the last year to go toward feeding the hungry? I want to be absolutely clear with all of you that the idea and the insinuation that you have to have a God to be a good person is absolutely, fundamentally, unequivocally false. If you walk out with anything tonight, I want you to know that were I your neighbor, were I your friend, I would do whatever I could for you. Because without a God or religious worldview, what do we have but each other to make this world better? So, where do I go from there? I want to start by thanking Ask a Wanderer, Pedro. Dude, I want to thank you for having me out here.
Of course.
I want to thank the Donaldson Fellowship. Pedro, in listening to your introduction, I loved it all the way up until you said that we're broken.
Yeah.
And I can't help but remember a good friend of mine saying, well, in what way are you broken? And are you sure that you haven't been told that you're broken, or that your leg was broken for you so that someone could sell you a crutch? Because what I see is human beings reaching out to each other, making it better than it ever was before. And in that way, we're not broken, we're just better.
I wish we had time to have this conversation today. I wish we could.
Absolutely. But I absolutely want you to know you're not broken. I'm so sorry that you struggled with addiction. And I'm very, very grateful that you've worked your way out of it. And that's fantastic. And whatever you needed to do to get there, fantastic. As far as the immaterial pieces and all of that, here's the thing. You make a case, you need to back it up. This is talking about God. Do you need God to make sense of the world? Well, that's presumptuous. There are lots of God definitions, lots of other religions. So why we settled on this one and not any other? I'd love to see them show why. Because the Christian God, the God of the Bible, the Old and the New Testament, right? The God of Abraham and the God of Isaac, right? Why that is the one you're talking about, and how that relates to the point you're about to make is something that I'm incredibly interested in seeing. And the rest is it contingent, right? If we want to talk about highbrow philosophy, you need to show that what you are asserting is necessary and contingent. And I have not been convinced to date, and I would love to see that changed tonight. With that said, I'll pass that over because I'm sure it's been longer than 5 minutes, but thank you all so much.
Well, thank you. Okay. Chris, your turn.
Welcome everybody. Thank you again for all of this. I just love this idea of being able to talk and discuss, and I appreciate you guys, coming out. I don't know of anything that shapes your worldview or shapes your life, your thinking, more than the question, is there a God, or do I need God to make sense of life? If you answer in the affirmative, as we do, then your next question is going to be the exact same question that you just answered. Well, which is the right one, and how do I know this is the right one? And we could go to that, we could go that route, but I want to stick with the topic of, do I need God to make sense of life? The atheist often assumes that the theist is the only one who has to give all the answers. We're the only ones with the burden of proof. They get to ask all the questions, but I would assert that that just isn't true. I would assert that they would have to back up, give proof of their fundamental beliefs as well, and their assertions. In the 80s and 90s, there was an atheist by the name of Anthony Flew. His findings and books were studied in all of the seminary schools of the day, and you had to come up and you had to, come up with defense and things for his questions, and only to come to find out in the last few years of his life, he said, I'm a Christian. And in fact, went from being an atheist and saying that there is a God, and said that, excuse me, let me back up and make sure he was a theist. Let me change that, I don't want to misquote it. And said if there was going to be a God, it would have to be the one of the Christian faith. Jean-Paul Sartre, on his deathbed, said that he could no longer trust himself to be an atheist thinker because it didn't fit together. It didn't come together as he had proclaimed and pronounced all of his life. One of the most hedonistic authors that was ever in the 19th, 20th century was Oscar Wilde. And on his deathbed, Oscar Wilde asked his lover, Robbie Ross, did you ever love any of those boys that we loved for their own sake? Robbie said no. Oscar Wilde said, I didn't either. Oscar Wilde didn't turn to say, well, let me think about this some more. He said, no, I need a priest, because the only one that can cleanse this heart of mine is Jesus Christ. On his deathbed. Friedrich Nietzsche, one of the most brilliant nihilistic philosophers, right, had an influence on Adolf Hitler. His teachings were introduced to Stalin and Mussolini. He coined the phrase, God is dead, in the 19th century, and then said in the 20th century, chaos will presume, and I'm maybe misquoting it a little bit, but it'll be one of the most bloodiest centuries. It turned out to be true. The irony is he himself spent the last few years of his life in an insane asylum, going through weeks not being able to speak, not saying words. When he would speak, he would speak the Bible verses that his mother had taught him as a kid. When you try to go down the atheistic view, you will see that it has tremendous attraction and seduction because it has the appearance of a world without boundaries. It has the foundation on which you can plant any structure you want. I want to do what I want. But it doesn't hold for the most important questions of your life.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Okay, well, thank you very much for the introductions. I really liked them because we have learned about the things that both believers and non-believers have done really bad in our history, and we are all aware of all of this. But while the Christian thinkers were speaking, I heard you, I think, Joe, a little bit just wanted to come back. So do you want to ask any questions about the introductions? We can start the conversation.
I didn't mean to interrupt. I was
that is
more of a subconscious, I don't know.
We can start with a few questions.
Sure, yeah. So, I mean, there's definitely a lot that requires a response here. And I wanted to talk about this sort of idea of deathbed conversions, right? So somebody's at sort of the end of their life, and in the case of Nietzsche and in the case of Sartre, without a doubt, they both lived what I would consider pretty fast lives, right? Relatively sort of unhealthy at the end. In the case of Nietzsche, suffering some pretty nasty mental illness. So if someone's approaching sort of the end of their life, where they really are like, oh snap, I actually am going to die, and perhaps even their cognitive capacities have diminished to some extent, because it's scary to think about, but it's going to happen to all of us, right? As we age, our things like IQ tend to degrade. Why would we care about that when we have a whole body of work where the most prolific period of their careers, when their minds were healthy, when they're sort of saying one thing? You bring up the idea of like the soldier trapped in a burning Humvee or something, crying out and converting to God. Well, that's not based on rationality. That's based on extraordinary circumstances. And for me, at least, and I think for probably a lot of other people too, I would prefer that my beliefs were based upon the thinking that I did in a calm and cool and clear-headed way, as opposed to, I'm living in an insane asylum and I can't make sense of reality anymore.
You want to follow up with that, Chris, about deathbed and what happens in that situation when people decide?
I think, Joel, you kind of scoff at it, and I get the whole idea of his work, but again, the topic of discussion is, can I make sense of life without God? At the end of life, when someone is facing that moment, again, the rational, let me go through all of this stuff that I have studied, it doesn't hold water, because that's why they cry out to God. Nobody says, oh, evolution saved me. Oh, nothingness. You see what I'm saying? So it doesn't hold to the point of, again, the most important question. My life is about to end. What happens next? They turn to God.
So before I let you go, after this, just to clarify, when you guys refer to evolution, do you mean evolution as a worldview perspective? I just want to clarify that there are many Christian thinkers out there that accept evolution. I'm one of them. As the way it happens.
There's actually atheists and agnostics that deny evolution, right?
Yeah, I don't want to pigeonhole anybody, because
just to make just to make sure that you're talking just about only like a tool to know the world, or a world perspective.
I guess just kind of a tool to know. Evolution has been used to deny God and His existence.
Okay.
So to some level, and so my view is, if that's the view you're coming at, that I believe evolution is the law of the practice, and this is how everything started, just as Sergio alluded to earlier, that there was nothing, Big Bang, and then it happened, and nothing was out there, then your worldview is eliminating God, or attempting to eliminate God.
Okay.
And so my point being that when you come to the end of your life and you say, I'm working, we don't need God, God is dead, he's irrelevant, all of these things, and then you come to the end of your life, the response is to turn to God.
Okay, I see. And correct me if I'm wrong, paraphrasing what you said. So Eric, just bringing this question for you. So it seems that what I understand from Chris is that at the end of our life, or throughout our life, we end up having, or we all have, actually during our life, we all have a hierarchy of values, right? At the end of it. So from your perspective, and this contextualizing this topic of the deathbed and at the end of your life, how do you see all of this from your world perspective? And how would you maybe just come back to?
Well, I'd love to answer that.
Please.
But first, I'd like to say, I haven't put words in your mouth. I haven't said what the Christian does. And yet in both of your introductions, you turn to serial killers and you turn to Nazis.
Cling, 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 cling. So, okay, so let's. Yes, so that might have happened. It might not have happened.
You could have cut it.
Yeah. So let's just, we're here together. Just let's explore the way we feel today.
I'm encouraging that they ask instead of finding
that is good.
Nazis and serial killers.
That is good. So
I'm happy to tell you I'm neither.
I'm glad to hear that. Me too.
Good.
So continue.
Secular humanism, actually. I'm glad that you actually brought up the evolution piece because it has nothing to do with atheism. If you want to know, I'd be happy to ask, and I'd be happy to show you exactly what that is. But so far, I've only seen suppositions of what you think I have to say, but we're here.
So what do you think, Eric?
What do I think of hierarchy when it comes to life?
Actually, let me rephrase that question, because sometimes I've been speaking English only for 6 years, and sometimes I say something, I mean another thing, and it's messy in my brain. So, from your world perspective, Eric and Joe, and I would like to ask this question to you, then, at this moment in your life, if you had to face death at this point, after the way you have experienced life, from your world perspective, how would you face life in terms of your experience, your emotions, and all of that, so we can learn about?
Sure. If I died tomorrow, I think that I could say that I lived a very fulfilled life. And if I could choose the way that I die, it would be to help others when it happened. But where do I stand with death? You're talking to somebody who doesn't believe in heaven, man. I don't know if there's a whole lot of answers to put that.
Well, I mean, death. I'll share my perspective.
Sure.
Just actually, it's very interesting, and I would love to have that conversation with you in the future. It's very interesting. When I was a secular humanist, that is when actually I realized that there was some type of brokenness. I mean, it wasn't Christianity that what taught me that there was some type of brokenness in the world, and the fact for me that I got to that perspective is because I didn't understand how life, the existence of life, subsequently brings death. It doesn't, for me, as a person that exists in the world, for me it doesn't make sense that there is life and that there's death. So that is actually what brought me to thinking the way I think today. But
what lives without dying?
Huh?
What lives without dying?
So I think, Eric, if I can jump in here, the point I think you're trying to make is, without death, how can we even determine what's living? Death being the backstop of life, the finality of life. If we had no death, where could we even discern? How could we discern what life is?
Is that what you mean?
Yeah, it's just I want to focus more on the facts that, like there are many people, both believers and non-believers, that at one point they have to face the death of a friend, the death of a family member.
Absolutely.
And it seems that, I don't know, I'll just throw a percentage, like it seems 90% of people all around the world will end up suffering because of that. So that suffering seems to be something that is completely intrinsic in the death itself. Like I haven't found in my experience, although there might be people there, that someone dies and you're 100% happy about it. There's always some type of pain, like there's something that is hard to accept, no matter our world perspective. So that is my question. From your perspective, and also from your perspective as well, my question, I'll try to do it as best as I can. How do you feel about death now? And excuse me if you actually answered that question already.
No, that's okay.
Yeah.
So the way I would answer it is live the best, most fulfilling life that you can, building strong, loving, caring relationships, creating more open and tolerant communities. And if you can do that, I think you should be pretty proud by the time that you die. When it comes to deathbed confessions, I'll put on my Christian hat. I was born and raised a born-again Christian. And I would say that when I was a Christian, I would scoff at those lukewarm Christians who think that they could fool God by converting at the very last moment, or at least attempting to, for fear of hell. Christianity, I mean, come on, Christians, it's not death insurance, right? I remember saying that. But I don't think anything of how you feel about death or your fear has anything to do with what is real in the world. It just has to do with how you feel about it.
Okay. So I have a question for you guys here. So I know that you guys at one point in your lives you lived life without being followers of Christ, right? So in order to make sense of life in those periods, and then when you came back to faith, what things changed through that process?
So, I'm sorry, can you say the beginning of that question again? I was too busy focused on the
No, that is
part.
okay.
No, go ahead.
So what things changed from being a secular humanist or a person with no beliefs about there being a God to being a follower of Christ? What things changed about the questions that we're tackling today?
Well, I would say before I actually become a born-again Christian, I would say that I did things without any guilt. I was very sneaky. I lied about everything. There was no reason for me to lie about stuff. I would just lie just because I knew I could get away with it. I had no bearings about, messing people over. I would do pretty much whatever I could to get high. I would do whatever I could to drink. There was really no guilt there. My conscience was pretty much seared. And then when I finally came to Christ, when I was 23 years old, it's funny, I was on fire for about a good 4 or 5 months. I'm talking about not doing anything wrong. I was, following the word, following Jesus. I would actually, it was funny, I actually watched, there was 10 Bible stories. It was cartoons for kids now. And this is because I knew absolutely nothing about Jesus. I knew nothing about the Bible. I would actually watch these 10 Bible stories 3 months straight. That's all I watched. All I watched. You can ask my wife. I know she was upset at me because I didn't watch anything with her. And then it came a time where I gave in. I gave in to somebody offer me a beer. They were like, hey, everything in moderation. I drank that one beer turned to two turned to four turned to a 6-pack. And then I was back at it again. But the thing that was different is that when I did these things, I had this gut-wrenching feeling that it was wrong. And it wasn't just because I was intellectually thinking about, oh, God's looking at me, God's going to strike me down. It was a heart change. It was that the Lord took my heart of stone and made it a heart of flesh. So it was totally different. And now I can never do that.
And let me actually challenge him. If you want Chris to answer to this question as well, let me challenge a little bit that, because in my experience, I have friends and I know of organizations of secular humanists that could put to shame many, people that profess to be Christians. And so, is it only the belief, or what is it? Because what I hear from the explanation is just that there are certain things that we do that we shouldn't do, but at the same time we realize that in the world there are both believers and non-believers that do the same thing. So there must be something else there that is not just what we do.
Well, it kind of goes to what you were saying earlier, and I admire all the work that you're doing, to help feed hungry. Man, that's fantastic. 2 weekends ago, we just gave out 20,000 pounds of food in our community. So we're doing the same stuff stuff like that is truly awesome, and both sides of this coin that we're on can do things like that, and I think they should. You want to help humanity, period. That's the goal. Where we come in with our belief is kind of, again, what you were referring to. You use the word brokenness, I use the word fallenness, or fallen, and it can be kind of similar in nature, in that without it, kind of going with Sergio's story, without the barrier to guard per se. It's like you're going down the highway of life, and you could turn left, you can turn right, you can do whatever you want to do. But for the Christian worldview, there is a barrier that says, no, this is the path that you should be on. This is the better path. And it ends up, I don't believe, even what you were talking about, Eric, and you said, it's not death insurance. It's absolutely not. It is not death insurance. I don't believe that. What I do believe is that a person can, at the end of their life, realize the way that they have lived it, what they have taught, and what they have believed was wrong and can change. I do believe that. I do believe that there are incidents in our life in which God comes in, one of those being the main point of Scripture, Jesus Christ entering the earth. So I do believe that those conversions can happen. It ultimately, again, depends upon God being the judge of the heart and the motive behind it, which is motivation behind why we do what we do. Why do we do what we do? Is it because I'm afraid of God? No, it's because I believe God wants me to do it, and that's what I want to do. So,
Joel, would you like to?
Yeah, so there's a couple of points that I just can't leave unaddressed. It's going to actually bother me. So when we talk about Nietzsche, when we talk about his quote, "God is not dead," the full quote is actually not God is not dead, right? That's the name of a really,
we got it.
Yeah. God's Kevin Sorbo.
Yes, I know, man. You want to say it? Keep saying it, man. Keep saying it. God's not dead.
Rubbing off on you, man.
Right. You know, when I watch, I'm not even going to talk about it. I'm about to talk about Xena Warrior Princess, but yeah, anyway. So there was a line that you used. What is seductive about the atheistic view of reality is that you can make of it what you will. You can do with it whatever you want. That's actually not fun, right? I would much rather have a view of reality that told me how things were, how things actually are. I would like to have a view of reality that I felt really did give a sufficient account for things like the intangible laws of logic, deductive reasoning. But as it stands, I don't think there actually is any such worldview that can properly account for those sort of things. I'll hit you with an analogy. If you went out to the movie theater and you saw Spider-Man, you could pick up a Spider-Man book, a comic book, and you can infer that the best explanation for Spider-Man is a radioactive spider, right? But that's not the case. It could be the case that you don't actually understand why people like Spider-Man or make Spider-Man movies or anything about this Spider-Man, but sort of conjuring up and holding it as an axiomatic necessary belief that Spider-Man comic books, that Peter Parker was actually bit, what I would say is unfounded. Now, what keeps the atheist from going off the rails? Well, in my view, it's the same thing that keeps everyone from going off the rails, and that's each other. If I came up here and I started ranting and raving, and I started talking nonsensically, Pedro probably isn't going to ask me to come back and speak again, right? But I like doing these, so I try not to rant and rave. Try to make sense when I'm up here. So that's my point. Is it's society. It's things like governments. It's things like our relations that keep one another in line. And it may not be perfect. We may not have sort of an objective, absolute answer of what is wrong and what is right. But it's a process, and it's a boat that I think we're all in together.
Can I?
Yeah, please.
Just kind of like to address what he just said.
Please.
You started off your introduction, Joel, and you said we have to be able to say we don't really know, or I could be wrong in my beliefs, I believe was the quote. And that was your very opening statement. Now you're telling us that you believe society keeps us in play, but you could be wrong about that.
Yes, absolutely. I make no claims about absolute knowledge. I make no claims about having some direct link to the way the world is, because I don't really believe that anyone does. So I'll hit you with this. How do you solve the problem of hard solipsism?
Wait a minute.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm getting excited.
I know. So your worldview could be wrong. The way you believe things could be wrong. So if society is supposed to, it's what you said, keeps us in check and balances, and governments. Governments lie, governments steal, governments cheat. People do that. Like, I could probably ask for a show of hands, even though and who has lied this week? no hand would go up because everybody would lie. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm just kidding. Don't get that. It's just I don't know. But I could ask that, and the people that would honestly say, yeah, I've probably lied this week. I've probably done some things that I shouldn't have done this week, which again would show us that society is not a good boundary keeper. If society is saying you can go this way, you can go that way, you can do this, you can do that, you know, because again, it may not be your true view, and again, all of Christendom isn't necessarily our view, because there are many people that claim to be Christians that aren't, and so they do a lot of things. And I'll get, and here's the reason why I know that they're not.
But are they Scotsmen?
No true Scotsman policy, right?
So Eric, did you finish?
Yeah, I guess.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So Eric, what does society do for us? Just following with Chris.
Sure, no problem. Isn't that an appeal to consequence? I mean, if you're saying this looks bad, therefore we can't do anything about it, how does that have any bearing on truth?
I'm not saying we shouldn't do anything about bad. I'm just saying if your judgment or your goal setting is society is the judge, society is the goal. Like they're the ones that are putting the touchdown markers. So if we cross that line, that's the touchdown. Society moves the goal all the time.
Absolutely.
So then how can that be a true touchdown marker? If you tell me I'm a football player.
I got
Okay.
it. Yes, absolutely. Yes. Okay. We are always moving the goalposts to a better place, because 50 years ago, the idea of segregation was still totally cool. 100 years ago, okay, I can go 200 years ago, we could talk about slavery. But we're getting better. And so if you brought somebody from 200 years ago to today and asked them, all right, so what do you think about women? They're probably going to give you an answer that a whole lot of people in this room aren't going to be super excited about. But it's because we are constantly moving toward building a better society that we should be proud of it. Now the question here is, it seems like you're ready to throw it out. I'm honestly assessing it. What is your response?
Well, my response to what you just said would be, if we're constantly moving the goalpost, moving the marker, you claim it's better. What's the foundation for it being better? Because somebody who disagrees with you, so you take the person from 200 years ago, they would say, no, it was better back here when people didn't do what y'all were doing now. It was better back here when sex wasn't on screens. It was better back here when, even going to the segregation issue, when couples didn't marry from interracials. It was better back here. So what is your foundation for saying it's better?
Can I jump in here? Because I think this was actually, somewhat my position, right, is that society is what gives us these guardrails. And I'm not necessarily trying to say that it's better. I'm trying to say that's what it is. Sort of de facto.
It's just this.
So, hold on. Yes. And yes, corruption exists. Yes, we're humans, we're fallible, and sometimes we do an awful job at sort of building this world that we share together.
Yes.
But that's sort of just how it goes. And what I would say is we're actually getting better. There's a quote from Martin Luther King that says that the arc of history is long, but it bends towards justice. And I agree with that. I think that Steven Pinkman wrote a book that I think I've heard you and seen you talk about. I think that's called The Better Angels of Our Nature, and it lays out empirically how we actually are getting better. In the same way that we're advancing our knowledge of biology and we're advancing our knowledge of physics, we're advancing our knowledge of moral theory. I think that we can look at something like how we treat the insane, or how we treat the most vulnerable. We actually are sort of, and I don't like to use this word objective, but you can look at it, and it seems intuitively true to me at least, that we as a people are getting better, and that we have reason to be optimistic, even if, I don't know, you don't like Donald Trump or something, right?
Well, I like to chime in because I've been kind of quiet over here. Sure. But when I hear the word better, the thing that comes to mind is, okay, I understand we're trying to get better, but what is the best? Like, if we're trying to get better, that means that there's a standard that we're supposed to appeal to.
No,
Why not?
because
That's very subjective, I would say. And-
exactly.
Yeah,
which is why we don't do it.
right, but my thing is that the phrase "so what" is a philosophical, devastating critique to your worldview, then I think you probably need to look at your worldview.
I don't know what that means. I'm
Yeah,
sorry. I'm gonna have to.
So,
Could you
well, the reason why
clarify?
I say "so what" is because, okay, we can say that, okay, the society that we live in now, we say that this good, it's good. But back in Nazi Germany, obviously, Hitler would say that killing Jews was good. That's good. So what's the difference? What makes us better than them back then? It was a majority vote, right?
Okay.
Hitler rose to power with 31% in the Reichstag.
Right.
I
Hold on,
think
it wasn't a majority vote.
We're
Yeah.
turning away from the topic.
so. Yeah, and I would like
and-
to. No, Eric, just
Yeah.
finish. I'm sorry.
No
Finish
worries,
it.
absolutely. Keeping score. Talking about Nazis too? Talking about Nazis too.
Okay, yeah, so I think, the question, I think it's a good question. So, for example, in Christians,
Sure.
when saying better, there seems to be a direction. I don't think from my perspective, actually, when saying better is something that we have achieved at this point. I don't believe that. We're still reaching to that better that is kind of impossible. Yeah,
Absolutely.
love your enemies. That's very difficult to do. So that's why the path is still there. But I think the question is, and I would like to learn a lot about this, by the way. So when from a secular humanist perspective, when saying better, what the question might be, where is the direction of better? Is that like a pragmatic, like it works here, and then we explore and we assess together, and then we move from there?
So two things.
Yeah.
Number one, secular humanist is not atheist.
Okay. Oh yeah, of course.
So
Yeah.
let's actually
Definitely.
make sure that if you didn't know that,
Yeah.
atheism is just the thing about the God.
Yes.
Everything else is what you build up from there. Secular humanism is one of those things. I
Mm-hmm.
would actually argue that everything that doesn't have God on it is secular.
I see. Yeah. Thank you
so
for clarifying that.
Feeding the homeless is secular. The prayer you do beforehand is not secular, it's religious. And so when we join hands in doing those secular things together, I absolutely love it. I hope we do more. But where are we getting better?
Yeah, it's more.
Yeah,
interaction.
there's a
Eric.
there's a begging the question.
Yeah. Okay.
And the question that's being begged is, what is this ultimate standard? Something that y'all are pointing towards, which I appreciate according to the debate style that I understand that we all have. That's kind of a cornerstone. I don't think that. And honestly, I live in a world that I wish my children won't live in, because I hope that we can see the end of child abuse, of hunger in the world, of ignorance leading to massacres, where we can treat each other with kindness, love, empathy, and compassion. Empathy being a thing that is actually biologically encoded into you, by the way. Are we getting better? We're moving forward, yes. But fundamentally, I need to throw out your question, because you're begging a question that needs to be substantiated before you can ask it.
But can I follow?
Of course.
Yeah.
How do you know that we're getting better? Like that. That's the.
So
I threw out your question.
But you can't just do that
No,
to
no,
make
I just
sense of
did.
life. But that doesn't work.
That's very
Like
Show
it's-
me why.
Why?
Yes,
Because
Why?
because we're here to have a discussion of life.
Yes.
If you're making a definitive claim that we are getting better, there has to be something to say, this is why we're getting better, this is where we would like to go to next, this is where we came from, this was bad,
Sure.
this is good.
Absolutely.
You can't just, I don't want to answer that question.
No.
It doesn't work that way.
Is
So can I take
slavery
a-
bad?
Is
Is
what?
slavery bad?
Is slavery bad?
Yes.
You're the one making, I would say ultimately yes.
Yes! Perfect! Then we've moved past that, haven't we?
Have we? No.
Well,
Not really.
I mean, you do realize that we live in a society that is not segregated by race, correct? So why are you equivocating that? We live in a world that is a whole lot better, at least the United States.
Okay.
A whole lot better.
Okay. That I can agree with. The United States is better. You said we've eliminated slavery. That's nowhere near the case.
You're right, and I apologize for that.
So that's not even close to a world reality.
Right.
That is. So go ahead, Joe.
Sure.
I would like to hear what you have to say.
And I think I understand what you're getting at. What you're asking for, if there is a better, there must be a best. I think that's the thrust of your question. Do I have that? I want to make sure I
Yeah,
understand.
That's what I said.
Yeah, like, if you're saying this is better, where do we get? Where are we going to next? Like,
Right.
in 20 years, is that society going to be better? And how would you judge that it is better
Sure.
or that it might be worse?
So, do we have any soccer fans here?
Yes,
Who's better, Cristiano Ronaldo or Lionel Messi?
Ronaldo.
What?
And he doesn't agree.
That's right. So everyone's better. It is going to look different, and if that is subjective, right? So be it. How do I know that things will be better 20 years from now, or 30 years from now, or tomorrow? I don't. I hope they are. I hope that we can come up with solutions to the problems that we have, that we all collectively experience, things that we can all agree on. You don't have to be a Christian to be worried about plastics in the ocean, right? You don't have to be an atheist to be worried about plastics in the ocean. So if we can find these sort of things that we can come to agreement on, like, hey, I'd really like the sea turtles to be alive for my next generation.
Totally.
Then at least now then we have some working reference points that we can calculate if things are getting better or if they're not getting better.
Why does that matter though?
Why does it matter? Well, it certainly matters to me.
It's subjective, right? But
Yes,
I'm saying like
yes.
I'm saying like objectively, why saving the turtles, saving the rhinos, why does that matter? I understand you. I know. I see it. I know you're like but I'm just wondering like why is it better? Like why
Yeah. So Eric actually has a point prime that
I understand
I'm setting
why
him up.
it's
When he
better.
talks
Yeah.
about empathy being hard-coded as a sort of a biological thing. I don't know if you wanted to elaborate on that, because I think it actually speaks to his point. Yeah.
It does. It does. Can you remind me to tell them about Laplace?
I've never heard of that person, but I'll write it down.
I haven't either. So
No worries.
I haven't.
That's okay. Not relevant, so that's why we're putting a pin in it. Okay. So we are hard-coded for empathy. We have something called mirror neurons in our brains. You can see someone who looks like you, another human, and I can strap electrodes to your head, and we can measure brain activity. And when you see someone experiencing pain, you will feel for them. If you see someone getting their hand crushed, the part of your brain that relates to that hand it'll go off. Now that's biologically encoded into us, and that's encoded into us because we are a social species, because over time, species that are able to act in an empathetic way are better able to survive together, right? And we actually see this in the animal kingdom everywhere. I mean, you should see there were studies with monkeys where their sense of fairness is just exactly what you would see a lot of humans do. They understand fairness, they understand empathy.
To follow up on that though, monkeys may have a sense of fairness. A monkey also eat each other.
And they also they also throw poop at you.
Yeah, and neither of those two things are good.
Does that make either of them not empathetic?
I know humans who throw food.
Yeah, I know. What I'm saying is, I'm getting to the point of what you were saying.
Yeah.
You were saying that we're hard-coded for empathy.
Mm-hmm.
So if that be the case, shouldn't we then always show empathy? And if we are, or if we don't, how are we able to turn that coding off? Because obviously, if you hurt someone in a relationship, you lie to them, you cheat on them, you do any of those things that would hurt another person and hurt our social engagement, you're turning off that coding.
No, you're not. You're ignoring it.
So you're turning it off.
No.
You can use either word you want to, but
Those are not the same. It exists because if you know that a bad person's going to cheat on their spouse and you chose to do it, then you're being a bad person and knowing it. And if you're acting in ignorance, that's your ignorance.
No.
It has
I'm
nothing
talking
to do
about the
with whether
person.
or not you turn it off.
No, I'm talking about the person that is doing the cheating.
That's-
They're saying, you know what? I'm gonna ignore. You can't. I think you're just kind of using different terms to make it palatable, and I don't think you can do that. Just like you tried to throw the question out, I just don't think you can do that. It's the same thing. You're saying if I ignore the light switch, the lights don't come on. So therefore, there are no lights. You see what I'm saying? So if it's the same thing, if I'm ignoring it or turning it off to go ahead and hurt this person, but it's supposed to be hard-coded into me, I shouldn't be able to do that.
No, because that ignores the rest of you as a thinking, acting being. It's like driving to work and then going, that's how I'm going to go to work. I'm going to go this way instead. You know which way work is, but you can choose to turn left.
But that's not the same thing. Hard-coded, and especially, and I'm going to use a computer analogy. Hard-coded in a computer, that's the code. Right. It's going to do that regardless of what you do on this other end. It's going to do that function. Now, if you want that function to change, you got to go in, change the hard code, then the computer can now do something different. So what you're saying is that people are actually able to go in and either change their code, or it's not hard coded in.
I don't think you understand what I mean by empathy.
Would it be the special thing, Eric, that, for example, because I read about this and I find it very, very interesting. It's unbelievable. That empathy is encoded, but then we as human beings have the capacity to move away from this biological code and decide whether we can be empathy or not.
Yeah, it's like
So
saying,
what- yeah.
it's like saying, to you like chocolate cake or vanilla? I don't know, pie.
Pie. Now
Sure.
you're talking.
Absolutely. How come you don't eat pie for every meal?
Do what?
How come you don't eat pie for every meal?
I probably eat it way too often, but I know it's not good for me to eat it all the time.
In that way, we're talking, I think, about different things and we're talking past each other.
Okay.
And I think we can probably recognize that if you're going to go and define it as something that is inescapable of the way you would program an automaton, and I'm not, then you're welcome to do so, but you will have missed the conversation. I'd rather us understand each other than try and represent something that charitably, I don't think you mean, and I don't think you thought I meant. I'd rather seek to understand.
So, sorry, I'm going to jump in here.
Go ahead.
I'm excited. So when we talk about ignoring our coding, or if the coding's there, or when people have moral failings, to me, empathy is a form of intelligence. Your ability to, and I say for me, but there's some research that backs this up as well. Some people are more empathetic than others. I would say that some people act in what would normatively speaking, some people are more moral than others, just in terms of how we perceive morality normatively. If you look at somebody like LeBron James, who's a genius at basketball, there could be somebody that is equally a genius at morality or at being empathetic. Usually they're like, I don't know, like poets or writers or something, weirdos. Are you a poet?
Yes.
My point is
Is that point made or point?
Not everyone has this sort of perhaps ingrained coding or this ability to have empathy at the same level, and I think it can actually fluctuate throughout lives. My 8-year-old is very patriotic. I'm not patriotic, but I think that he's probably in a sort of a different stage of moral development, right? He perceives morality different than I do as a 30-year-old man that's, the life that I've lived. People do crazy things. I mean, we talked about Jeffrey Dahmer. He did heinous things, but he also had a very low degree of this kind of emotional intelligence. He was very bad at empathizing with people. So yes, I mean, to some degree, I think it can It's a biological incentive for us to empathize, right? But that doesn't mean that it's an absolute categorical statement that works in all humans or is exactly the same, looks exactly the same in all humans.
So I think you guys have enriched your world perspective really good. I think you guys understood from okay. So yeah. So and you guys know that at the end of the show, you guys can comment. We have a question part also. You can ask questions to the speakers. I think my last question before we go to the question part is something that I really like about humanity. Is that it seems that at some level, no matter our world perspective, we actually have come to terms about certain things being good. Loving is good. Being compassionate, is that the way you pronounce it?
Compassionate.
Yeah, there you go. Good. Being empathetic is good. So now let's put aside the fact that we disagree in the way we see the world. I think that's clear now. With what we know as of now and the things that we agree upon, what can we do together in order to improve society? Although disagreeing at a, let's put it this way, at a metaphysical level, what can we do together in order to tell people out there that these conversations can happen, that there are things that we can agree upon? How can we move forward instead of just having these conversations, leave these conversations, and then there's nothing else to do with these conversations? Where is the part, from your perspective, where we come together, not only to have the discussion, but also to start building bridges among
Can I
each
start?
other?
Is that okay?
Yeah, of course.
I mean, the very first thing that I would like to do is even address what Joel, what he stated in his opening statement about the sheriff gentleman that made the statements about homosexuality, that they should be killed. Equivocally, no. I do not agree with that. I stand firmly against that. That is not even in the realm of possibility in my Christian belief. I would stand with you 100% against that. It should not be preached from the pulpit. It should not be talked about. The people that come in with the signs and they stand at street corners and God hates this, whatever thing you want to.
Westboro.
No, Westboro Baptist is not in my realm of what Christianity truly is. So I think that's a starting point. Like, I agree with you. Like, let's go feed the homeless together, dude. Like, let's do it. Like, let's
buy yourself a beer, man. I'm buying you a beer.
I'll take a sweet tea, but it's. You go ahead. You go ahead. Like, I'm seriously, like, that's the starting point right there. And I think we can talk, you know, and we'll pray before we go feed the homeless, and you don't have to participate. That's totally fine. But I think that's the starting point. Is the church needs to stand up against the hate that's coming out of the church. Period. And if we, as who are not espousing the hate, continue to stay silent, as you were talking about earlier, we are just as culpable. We are, if I may be pronouncing that wrong. We are just as guilty. We need to stand up and say, you know what? God has never been hate. Period. If you are espousing hate from your church in the name of Christ, you are not in the name of Christ. And that's the starting point. Man, we can talk, I'm with you, getting plastic out of the oceans. Like, all of those humanitarian things, we need to be together. Then we can talk about the other stuff.
Yeah, I
Would you
would
like
say
to add
also,
something? Then I'll go with you guys. Yeah.
like here lately, I've been talking to Tangiel. I've been talking to her quite a bit. So if some of y'all don't know who Tangiel is, she's actually a moderator for the Atheist Experience on Facebook. And she actually...
No, it's okay. The ACA ended active moderation, but...
Oh, okay.
That's
Well,
okay.
we still talked and everything, because she actually kicked me off. She actually kicked me out there, said I was proselytizing, so we had a little debate. But no, even through that, you know, I didn't feel any ill will between Tangiel and I. We talked, you know, and we actually kind of had some funny little discussions and everything like that. And we're actually friends now on Facebook. And when she posts about, you know, the Catholic priests and everything that they do with the pedophilia and everything like that, I'm standing right there with her. I'm like, Yeah, you're right. That is horrible. That is absolutely horrible, and I don't espouse that. I don't even. They're definitely not Christian. They're not being like Christ. So when it comes to those kind of things, just like Pastor Chris said, I mean, when it comes to those kinds of moral indignations like that, I mean, that's something that I feel like that we really can stand together on.
Thank you for that, Eric and Joel.
So,
what can we do?
yeah, so I'll start with this. If you think that whatever your ideology is can be free from some sort of heinous actions, I can probably find you an example of history from where you're wrong, right?
Yeah.
When we talk about what we can do to move forward, I think the most important thing is respect each other's humanity.
Yeah.
Respect the ability for people to pursue their own truth. Pursue their own truth in beauty, pursue their own truth in things like morality, and insofar as that doesn't affect anyone else, insofar that that doesn't seek to impose its will upon anyone else, it can be respected. And I think if we're doing that, I think we're doing a pretty good job. So thanks everybody for
Okay, let's do it.
So here's one of the great things I love about being an atheist. I disagree with you. I think so long as we agree on what where we're basing our morality, we can come to definitively say what is objectively the most ethical thing to do in a given situation when we define the parameters. So, disagreed, but where do we start? We start, I'm not saying this as a cheap shot. I want to make you both better debaters, and I want to make you both better communicators. When we talk about the opponent, the other side, seek first to see the humanity. Instead of Jeffrey Dahmer, right? Why not Albert Camus? Instead of, well, we didn't give any examples, but when we talk about being ethical and moral, right? I can totally give you a list of atheists who do and have done good work, and I can give you a list of Christians. You know, I've used Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s letter from Birmingham jail on my show as an example of the way we should be aggregating for positive change. It's one of those honey and vinegar things. We seek first to find that shared humanity with each other. As much as I absolutely loved this, I think we flew far away from where we were supposed to go, maybe, as far as how we make sense of things. But you reminded me of Laplace, and so I'd love to leave you all with Laplace. You see, during the reign of Napoleon, there was a astronomer, Laplace. He had just written a book that cataloged the movement of the stars, and Napoleon kind of wanted to rib him. He found out a fun little fact about it. So he called Laplace in and he said, Laplace, you know, this book is phenomenal. It's amazing. You've been able to chart and catalog with incredible precision the movements of the stars, but I don't see God. Where is God? Because, I mean, obviously God has to be moving the stars. And Laplace said, well, I have no need of that hypothesis. Because the world itself, the universe itself and its movements didn't need it. And until we can show that there is a need, and then show that that's the answer for that it's necessary, I see no need to wonder why our worldviews would be any different. We're all in the same boat till we can show you're in a different one. And we're all working together, doing the same stuff. So, I mean, let's keep making the world a better place, and let's see that shared humanity in the other. And I will continue to do that. And I know I see it in your face. You'll continue to do that. And thank you so much. Pedro, thank you so much.
Of course. Yeah.
Thank you, Donaldson Fellowship. Thank you all for coming. I can't wait to all of the questions. I love this part. I could do this for hours. So
we know.
yeah, I know, right? I won't shut up. I know. So, yeah, no, any questions? Please. Sorry.
Okay, so yeah, we're gonna go to. So what I wanted to say is that I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope that you guys got some answers about how to make sense of life with or without God from our secular friends and thinkers and Christian friends and thinkers. At the tables, you have small papers, question cards, where you can write your question and you can write them down and give it to me, and I'll go over the question for 5 minutes and select. And I'm sorry that we cannot go over all the questions, but I'll try my best to select the ones that would challenge our speakers the most. So 5 minutes, and we'll go over that. So thank you very much. Let's see. As always. Oh, nice.
That's why I don't.
It's empty.
Oh, no, it's okay. Some water? Nice. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't want to sit here.
Okay, so as always, we don't have time for all questions, and I said the same thing at the other events that I did this with questions. It really humbles me to see an audience as sharp with such good questions. If your question hasn't been selected, please go to the speakers and ask them the question after,
Yes.
because I'm sure that they're going to be more than happy to do so, okay? Okay, so before I start, I'll just say thank you for someone that has said this. I think it's not the moment, but maybe if you guys want to ask, someone wrote, can Pedro tell his story of Christian atheist to becoming a Christian? And it's not the moment to do that, but if you guys want me to ask me that later, I would be more than happy to do so, okay? Cool, well, thank you for that, because usually the moderator is the guy that doesn't get any questions. Okay, let's start with this question. I find very interesting. Let's see. For the Christian friends today, Chris and Sergio. Is there any possible way that you could be wrong about your Christianity?
I would say no. Only reason why I say that is because since God is omniscient, He understands how to move in us to be able to know that He is real. So I'm a revelational epistemologist. So I know everything. I know everything because God has given it to me through revelation, through conscience, through His Word, and through creation.
Let me clarify that. Not that you know everything.
Not everything. I didn't say everything.
Everything that He knows.
I'm sorry. Everything that I claim to know, I know because God has given it to me. He has made me know.
You know things because you've received revelation from someone that does know everything, and that's the only possible way to have.
Right. Either you have all knowledge, or you have to know the one who knows everything.
I know that you guys want to go and ask, but let's keep the question because there are questions coming to you guys. Chris, any?
I would say. Sorry, Eric. We can talk later.
Yeah, of course.
I would say no, and the reason that I would have to say no is because my belief says I have to say no. Like I believe in the Scripture. The Scripture claims to be the truth. So if I'm going to believe it, then I have to believe it's true. So I can't believe that it's wrong.
Okay.
If that makes sense. I hope that answers the question.
I hope that answers the question. Okay, so we have a question, and I assume, and you guys help me, that this is for the secular friends here. So Eric and Joel, you cannot choose to ignore your coding to breathe. Why can you ignore empathy?
You know what? I actually heard a really great example from Jen. The best example that I heard tonight was just because you ignore to turn on the lights doesn't mean you don't have electricity in the house. And also I just spoke to someone who does coding who said problems happen in programming all the time. If you want to read it that way and think that's a gotcha, that's fine. But if you want to understand the crux of it, there are tons of biology classes that you can take that you can learn more about in mirror neurons, and any opportunity to learn and explore this amazing world that we're in, I suggest you take.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I think how I'm reading this question, I think it actually speaks to the hard problem of consciousness. Libertarian free will versus determinism. That is, if our minds are reducible down to atoms in motion, to what degree are we actually choosing anything? And I don't know. I think neurobiology as a science is still sort of in its infancy. I think that is the best way that we're going to get answers to those sorts of questions about when we use the word choice, how meaningful of a word is that actually? Are we actually choosing, or are we just sort of biological constructs? If it came to the point in neuroscience where that was sort of the accepted conclusion that everything is reducible down to physical components, I think at that point we need to have a really hard conversation about morality and about criminal justice and about all sorts of different things. But I don't necessarily think that we're there yet. But maybe we'll get there in our lifetime. Science is.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Eric. Okay, so I think this is a question for all of you, okay? The term I hope, or that clause, I hope, was used so. Where does your hope come from? Let's start here, and then we'll go there, okay? With short answers, maybe.
Short answers.
Yeah, because it's just for
my hope comes from Jesus Christ.
Okay.
That's the shortest answer I can give.
What he said.
My brain.
Yeah, my prefrontal cortex.
I mean, you could lobotomize somebody and kind of wipe out that part, and then they wouldn't have that. So seeing as that happens, then I don't think you have any other choice but to say your brain. It's poetic, though, to say Jesus.
Okay. Okay, this is a question for our secular friends. If God does not exist, what is your foundation for moral value? If there is no God, why have moral obligations to do anything?
Yeah, so I'll start with the second question first. So why do we have moral obligations to do anything? I don't know exactly what they mean by moral obligations. Whoever answered that question, who if I may, and you don't have to raise your hand. Whose question was it?
It was mine.
What you mean by moral obligations? Can you give me an example? Like, don't murder?
Moral obligations. You talked about going and feeding the homeless and helping the homeless. It's a moral obligation.
Mm-hmm.
Where does that come
So
from?
what compels us to do moral actions, even when it's not necessarily advantageous to us? Is that what you're saying? I think.
Say that again. I'm sorry.
What compels us to moral actions? Why do we act selfless, right? Even if it doesn't make sense to. Why does an elephant who sees sort of another elephant in another family risk their life in a muddy, stuck pit to get the little elephant calf out? And I know we've talked about this a lot, and I hope it's not sort of becoming a cliche, but empathy, right? It is our ability to project emotions. So no, in my view, as I see it, I don't think that there's any objective standard, right? I think that we can create an objective standard, and Eric talked about this a little bit, when we find these axioms that we can agree on, like, I don't know, not murdering each other, not respecting one another's property. And I think that's what creates moral obligations, that's what creates moral motivations, which I think is distinct concepts, but I'm sort of pushing them together.
Okay.
That was
Eric?
long.
You know what? I was presented recently with this proposition that there's no such thing as true altruism. And I said, but I help people all the time. And they said, but don't you feel good when you do it?
Friends, right?
No.
That was an episode of Friends.
Oh! sorry.
You with me? Yes!
Okay.
I miss friends.
Me too.
Okay. I mean, societally, don't you earn the respect and compassion of those who care about you when they see that you're doing good things? I mean, I would love to just explore the idea that there's no such thing as altruism, because even if there wasn't, there are societal benefits to us behaving altruistically, even if no one sees it. Because when no one sees it, in my heart, I feel like I did a good job, and that's enough.
Okay. Well, thank you for the question, and thank you, guys, for your answer. Sergio. First time I have pronounced that because that's the Spanish
The Spanish way,
name.
yeah.
So Sergio. So Sergio, do you mind if I ask you a personal question?
Oh yeah,
Okay.
it's fine.
So this question says, what evidence do you have that it was a supernatural entity that pulled you out of your addiction and not your own personal willpower?
Well, it's actually funny you asked that because I've been asked that multiple times
Okay.
because I use my testimony a whole lot to witness to people. Well, I will say, I'm gonna try to make this as short as possible. I was actually at a barbecue pit, didn't know the guy was a pastor. He owned the barbecue pit. I was sitting there talking to him, and all of a sudden he just came out and said, "You've been seeking Jesus, haven't you?" And I was like, "Where did you get that from?" And so I was like, going through things. I was like, "Yeah, I've been seeking for something." And then he said, "Well, what's taking you so long?" Then I was telling him about all the things that I love doing, the drinking, the smoking, all the other stuff. And then so he basically just kind of had this roundabout way of telling me, like, "Hey, the ball's in my court. I'm gonna pass it to you. Are you gonna dribble it, or are you gonna pass it back to me?" And I was like, "Man, I'm a baller, so I'm gonna dribble it." I got in the car. I started driving. And all of a sudden, I start thinking about all the stuff that I had did, because I never really just did like a recap on my life and everything that I did. And all of a sudden, I don't know where it came from, but it's like electricity hit my body. My heart started to warm up. Like it was absolutely insane. My heart started to warm up, and the tears just started to flow so hard that I had to pull over because my eyes were so blurry. I didn't want to wreck. And all of a sudden, it's like the desire to do all of those bad things had totally left me. I went home, threw away all my marijuana, threw away all my alcohol, told my wife, I was like, "Babe, I'm with Jesus now, And then so everything changed from there. It was no more desire to do all those bad things. And it was something that I tried to do on my own before because I was scared that my marriage was going to be lost. And it still didn't stop me.
Okay. Well, thank you very much
Yeah.
for sharing that. Sit here.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, to Eric and to Joel. Yes. About the fact that we're getting better as a people, how do you know that's not due to the spread of Christianity?
Ah, gotcha. Crusades.
Okay.
Oh, Westboro Baptist Church. Wait. The Make America Straight Again conference that was done last weekend at the for the anniversary of the Pulse nightclub shooting. They're not all Scotsmen here, right? Christianity is a very broad, very, very broad brush. It's not up to me to tell you whether you're or not you're a Christian. I'm just going to believe you. And if you say you're a Christian, cool. Dude, you can choose among yourselves who you want to exclude from the tribe. But no. And also, that implicitly is saying that people like us have nothing to add. The spread of Christianity? Really? We can look at this societally, because the last time there was absolute theocracy, it was called the Dark Ages. Right? We move forward as a society, and I say we move forward because morally, ethically, we can look at the past and go, you know what? I am glad I'm not living back then. And you know what? I hope that 5 generations from now, people can look at us and go, could you believe that? Do you know how they treated people? And we can aspire to do more. Stay hungry. Keep pushing for better ways to treat each other, and we're going to be good. But if you're going to lay the credit for being a good person on Christianity, how dare you? How dare you throw out every other faith tradition in the history of the world? How dare you throw out every other society that has made steps towards getting better? And how dare you think that we only started being good people when we became Christians? Not cool.
Okay.
So
There you go. That was clear. Joe?
I didn't read the question as a categorical statement, as in, it is Christianity that is making society get better. Is Christianity a part of society getting better? I would certainly say yes, right? You guys talk about the great work that you're doing, right? And I'm glad that you're doing that great work. I think doing that great work is a lot better than burning witches or invaded the Middle East, right?
I would agree with you.
Yeah, right? So, and I mean, even if you look at the history of philosophy, to say that Christianity had no impact on something like the Enlightenment, it's like, it's really, really wrong, right? I mean, that's, if you're looking at it objectively at all, that's not the case. So, yeah, I mean, is Christianity a part of our world getting better? I think that's probably a fair statement to say. Is it the only part, or is it even the biggest part? That question, I think, is a little more fuzzy.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And here goes the last question, and this is for you guys. And so yeah, let's go for it. Do you consider the God claim to be unfalsifiable? And if so, how can that belief be reasonably justified?
You want to go first?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
I actually had something written down. Unfalsifiable. Is it all right if I read scripture real quick? Just, it's
Yeah.
fine? Okay. So Romans 1, I got 18 through 21. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth and unrighteousness, because that which is known about God is evident within them. For God made it evident to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. For even though they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks, but they became futile in their speculations, and their foolish hearts were darkened.
That's your answer.
Yes.
Okay, Chris, you want to say something?
Do I believe it's unfalsifiable? Like
Unfalsifiable.
unfalsifiable, that
Yeah.
somebody could come in and disprove that God exists? I'm assuming that's the. I don't think you can disprove it. I don't think. I don't think it's possible to prove that there isn't a creator when a creation is there. If that makes sense. If it's not your question, if I didn't answer your question, I apologize. Please come. But I don't think I just don't think it's falsifiable to say we have proven that there is no God.
Can't prove a negative.
And
I'll give you an answer for that. We have a few minutes and not time for another question. So just quick.
Yeah, so I mean,
Comment on that?
when you say that you can't prove a negative, I get what you're going. I'm sorry, I'm quibbling about wording, but that's like, you can prove a negative. It's difficult, and you got to do. Usually, people prove negatives by way of deductive reasoning, and when we talk about falsifiability, really what we're talking about is sort of the scientific method. Falsifiability being sort of the litmus test whether something can be considered science or not. So if a propositional claim is not falsifiable, if there's no way to disprove it, then we can't apply the scientific method to that. So I don't really have a problem with their answers, because I actually think their answers I agree with. If you can't falsify something, well, that means you can't apply science to it, and maybe you need a different way to get at it.
I would say God isn't a scientific question, it's
Right.
a philosophical question.
Okay.
Up until there's scientific evidence for it, and then you might use it. So, this is not an elephant. I have given you a negative, and we can run tests to determine whether or not that is true. I can prove that negative by showing that this is a cup of water. You can absolutely prove negatives. That said, the bigger question, it came up when you said, how can you show that a God doesn't exist? And I would challenge you, because there are totally ways. Do you believe in intercessory prayer? Do you believe you can pray and God would listen to your prayers and do, potentially, if God agrees, what you ask of them?
Just a comment. We wouldn't have time, Eric. You can continue this conversation. Yeah, because we just don't have time. Just a comment. You guys can continue.
I just want to
with
give
the
a quote
conversation.
if
Really quick.
I promise.
really quick.
So David Berlinski, leading physicist and agnostic, says this: has anyone provided proof of God's inexistence? Not even close. Has quantum cosmology explained the emergence of the universe or why it is here? Not even close. Has our sciences explained why our universe seems to be fine-tuned to allow the existence of life? Not even close. Are physicists and biologists willing to believe in anything so long as it's not religious thought? Close enough. Has rationalism and moral thought provided us with the understanding of what is good, what is right, and what is moral? Not close enough. Has secularism in the terrible 20th century been a force for good? Not even close. To being close. Is there a narrow and oppressive orthodoxy in the sciences? Close enough. Does anything in the sciences or philosophy justify the claim that religious belief is irrational? Not even in the ballpark. Is scientific atheism a frivolous exercise in intellectual contempt? Dead on. That's David Berlinski. And so,
Okay, I'll
and
let
I'm
you
sorry,
say something.
I know it's gonna, I know
I'll
it's
let
gonna
you
say
say
something else. I'm sorry, I know that's what it is.
Fine.
Two quick things. David Berlinski, if you want to talk to him, bring him up on the stage. If you want to talk to the atheists that are here to talk to you, ask us. Right? Number two, you ended that quote in talking about anti-intellectualism when, if you read it again, that is one of the most anti-intellectual statements I've heard in a long time.
Okay, and with that, we're going to finish the conversation.
This video is made possible by supporters of the Atheist Debates Patreon project. You can find more information and add your support at patreon.com/atheistdebates.